Hello and good evening. Welcome to our talk on playing with presence. My name is Nick Trygstad and I'm coming to you from Marsden in West Yorkshire, and I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague Dale from Whaley Bridge. How are you, Dale?
Good. I'm very happy that the fireworks have stopped this evening while we have this conversation. So, yes, hello to everybody listening and watching this, and really looking forward to the whole evening.
Yeah, we thought we might start by just telling you a little bit about ourselves, in case you don't know who we are. My main job is principal cello of the Halle, and I've also been a tutor at the Royal Northern College of Music for about 10 years now. I originally came to England to study with Hannah Roberts and Ralph Kirschbaum back in 1998. I'm originally from Minneapolis, and it really felt like home, basically, and it was such a wonderful opportunity to be offered the job in the Halle Orchestra. And I love working with my dear friend and colleague Dale, who's also in the Halle Orchestra. But Dale, would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm originally from New Zealand, and I came to study in London back in the 80s. So I've been actually living longer in the UK than in my homeland, which that's fine. The UK is a beautiful place, as is New Zealand. And my interests when I was studying in London also led me to train in the Alexander technique. So I'm also a qualified teacher of Alexander technique, which I use very much in relation to teaching cello and for myself as a cellist. I left London a good while ago now, something like 25 years ago, and moved up north and eventually joined the Halle, where I was thrilled after a few years to be able to welcome Nick along as principal.
Well, thank you, Dale. And we enjoy working together so much that we've actually started in the last few years another venture, which sort of springs out of Dale's Alexander technique work and our mutual interest in presence and mindfulness. We call it the Cello Retreat, and we were running it fairly regularly up until this past year when the pandemic stopped all these things. Well, we hope to get it started again, and it's a wonderful week-long event, usually working with sort of music college-age cellists, where we explore ideas of presence and playing, and in a very non-pressured environment. It's a really special event, and it also involves Dale's husband Patrick, who's also a Alexander technique teacher. And I suppose this evening, Dale, we're hoping that we're gonna guide our viewers through some of the ideas that we explore on the Cello Retreat. Is that what you're expecting?
Yes, well, we've had to pre-record a lot of stuff because of COVID and because of the lockdown that came, which has been interesting. So we've had many long discussions about this very favourite subject of mine, which is interesting because I think we come at it from different points of view, and I think that comes over in the conversation you will see that we recorded just before lockdown. So does that cover it for you?
Yeah, I think so. We've assembled the top 30 minutes just about of our conversation, and I suppose because discussions around presence, it's a really individual and personal subject. I suppose everyone has their own experience of what it is to be alive, and I suppose for that reason, it's a very informal and open kind of discussion. So we hope that you get something out of it. We will see you at the end of it, and hopefully we'll even be able to join you live at the end of it to take some of your questions. So I guess now we'll head over to Dale's home in Whaley Bridge, to our lovely music room where we were having our conversation.
So here we are in Dale's music room, and thank you, Dale, so much for joining me for this discussion of mindfulness. I thought this would work much more fluidly to be a discussion, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on mindfulness and presence, because I suspect we're all coming from our own experiences in these things, and mindfulness or presence is a really difficult topic to discuss. Because in a way, I suppose, at its heart, it's incredibly simple, but yet it has the power to be phenomenally transformative. And also, I suppose, all of us have our own unique experience of what it is, and so it's sort of a different way of understanding it. And so I think it might be really useful to discuss this between us, I suppose. Maybe the first thing that we should try to nail down, if it's possible, is a sort of definition of maybe even of mindfulness, perhaps. Do you have a definition, Dale, that you would like to? I'll put you on the spot and you can do it first.
Yeah, okay. You know what? I'm not actually that comfortable with the word mindfulness. I use it a lot. Say, teaching a student, I'll say, be mindful of just the moment before a shift, or be mindful of this or that. And so I do use it, and I find it really, really helpful. I prefer the word presence because it's more encompassing of something bigger than just what might be the mind.
Oh, I see.
And again, the mind, of course, what is it? You know, this is the big question. So when we say mindful say to be mindful of something in our practice or when we're playing, I feel like that's a very specific sort of moment that we can line up the mind with an activity. Mm-hmm. But presence is something bigger for me.
Okay, yeah. I see what you're saying. And I mean, maybe then we'll go back a step and sort of try to describe what the mind is. And the sort of definition that I've inherited from the books and the speakers that I've listened to really is that the mind is that voice in your head, really. And we don't know the experience that you, the audience, have individually had dealing with these issues. But for some of you, if you're thinking, what is he talking about, the voice in my head? If you just had that thought, that is indeed the voice I'm talking about. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Dale, is that the mind is just part of something bigger. But for me, in discussing this topic and in the work that I do, both in the retreat and my own personal work and my work in teaching, I find it really helpful to kind of understand the mind, because I feel that the mind, or this voice in my head, actually works against me a lot of the time. So kind of fundamental to the mind is that it's restless. It just never shuts up. And I have had experiences of performing where this voice is talking to me, and I've even started talking back at it, saying shut up, but of course that's also the mind. Now I have two voices in my head, really. So it's incredibly restless. We can't really control it. I mean, I would invite all of you at home and maybe us here to just take a moment and see what the first thought that comes into your head is. I mean, I imagine for most of us, we've already had a thought. I don't know that I could get mine to be still in this context of being filmed. So basically for me, any attempt to kind of actively try to bypass or silence this voice is always doomed to failure. Do you have a sort of a similar experience with your voice in your head, Dale?
Absolutely. Yes, there's that chattering part of my mind, and I can almost give it a physical location in where we think of as our mind being kind of this world in the brain, and it's more in the sort of frontal lobe, so it sort of feels like it sits behind my forehead, and that it's like some kind of non-stop tape running right through and
like the Energizer Bunny. It just keeps going and going.
Yeah, and it's not what I want to connect to. So just now, when you invited our lovely listeners to think about what was the first thought that came in your head, and I did the same. Well, first of all, I had a visual trigger, so I was looking at the piano over there and I saw the pedals, and then I thought pedals and thought feet. So I went into my body and then noticed my breathing. So these are ways that and because it was a sort of exercise, if you like, then this can be a response to an exercise whereby I start to use a practice that I'm familiar with of how do I quieten that chatter, and where do I go? Mm-hmm. And I go into my body. I'm looking for a sensory response.
And we're talking already in terms of how to sort of bypass or quieten the voice. But I mean, what's the problem with having the voice in the first place? I suppose I have my own feelings about that. Do you have?
In the context of in the context of anything. Let's say I'm going for a walk and I'm blessed with having beautiful hills around here, and of course the mind is going to be busy during a walk. But if I'm in my mind, then I'm not really appreciating each step I take and my surroundings, and I may as well be on a virtual walk on what's the thing you do with your bike, Strava or something. Yeah. You can be on virtual hillsides.
Zwift.
Yeah, that one. Okay. So technology helps us live the world virtually, and I actually want to experience the world physically, presently, and through my senses. Yeah. And that's the same with playing. So taking the walk analogy, I can transfer it to the practice room or the performance situation and realize that the mind is almost sort of wired to our virtual world rather than our here and now present world. Yeah.
I think I in the past referred to this voice or mind as almost like a filter, and you can be living your entire life kind of through. Well, it's like having a narrator. It's like, I don't know, those of you who ever saw the show The Wonder Years. It's an American sitcom, and there's always this voiceover narrating the entire thing, kind of describing it. And my experience of life is often like that. And I guess the fundamental thing about this voice that I think matters kind of the most is the fact that it really is only commenting on something that's already happened or making a comment about something that might happen. And I guess that's why I find it really helpful to identify the mind and to sort of spend some time getting to know it so that we recognize it when it's working, and when we're able to focus on the other things. You're talking about other sensory experiences that we have in living. You know, if you're washing the dishes, the feeling of the water, the feeling of the way your spine is sort of assembled on your feet as you're washing them, or if you're going for a walk, you have the feeling of the wind, you have the color of the light. There's so many sensory experiences that make up living, I suppose. And if we're just predominantly listening to the voice that's going on in our head, we're not actually in that moment, I guess. We're not actually in the present. So I don't want to be overly negative about thoughts. In a way, we're talking about a lot of the disadvantages of the mind and the thoughts and how they take us away from experiences. But I just wanted to make an analogy. I hope this isn't offensive to anybody. It isn't to me. But I sort of think of thoughts as a stereotypical American tourist. I think I'm allowed to say that. And the stereotype is that they head around Europe, or let's say they come to Britain, and they tick off Buckingham Palace, and they might head down to Stonehenge or up to see Stratford, and then it's just like going through a list and ticking things off and not really experiencing things. It's almost like when they arrive, tick, I've seen it, and then they might leave and say, I've done Britain or something, and they've basically only been to London. Of course, there's also lots of advantages to this kind of tourism. So I guess I'm saying this is the advantages to thoughts. They they achieved something. They booked their flights. They got to their plane on time. They made sure that they were able to eat. Because of course what we can't do really in life is just sit and look at a vista and appreciate that vista and never do anything else. I mean, there are things that are necessary to do for living. So I suppose in that way, I think thoughts, they also have their uses. So I'm basically spending time bashing the American tourist, but also saying that, there are useful things that thoughts do. It's not all bad. There are many ways we need to use it, and I think of the mind in a way as a tool. But the important thing is knowing sort of when to put it down. You're not going to use a sledgehammer to crack an egg. So you might use your mind to program, how much time you have to practice in a day and fit in everything else you need to do in that day, how you want to divide that practice time. And, thoughts are great for knowing, I have a recital in 2 weeks' time, my concerto is in 6 months' time. This might determine how I'm going to divide up my time. Or, I've got a rehearsal tonight. Let's say, I'm sure many of us play in orchestras, either amateur or professional. I only got this much time. How do I want to use that? It has its uses, but I suppose the thing is being able to put it down and then be in the process that you're doing when you're doing it.
Yeah, and you could almost think, an analogy comes to mind for me, that all that you're describing now of the thinking process is like the menu, and then you get your meal, which is your experience that you use your senses to enjoy. So you get to taste, you get to smell, you get to cut it and feel its texture, and it's all experience and play. That's the enjoyment part of the planning. So our minds have this fabulous capacity to plan, and we need it. We do need the planning, even a little bit. Well, certainly in our practice room, we need some kind of planning, although I actually love not planning as well. Just to throw that one in. I love to have a more improvisatory approach to my practice, to sort of even allow myself to roll into a kind of moment of boredom and just see what's born out of that. What does that something will come out of that. There's a sort of balance, if you like, between a balance between really motivated, processed practice, if you like, and explorative improvisation of practice.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're almost describing, what it is to be a very, very small child. Let's say, if you watch one of them play, they don't have an end thing. They don't have what the parents are thinking, which is probably, I wish you'd stop doing that. We need to get here. We need to do that. They're just fully immersed in the process.
Yeah, I remember very well how our son, when he was little, with Lego, you've got the directions. You're going to build this according to the map.
Yep.
And he never constructed according to the map, ever.
Yeah.
Or if he did, maybe once, he had more fun deconstructing it and then creating a whole new thing with the same tools, by which time all the pieces are all mixed up with everything else and you can never get your pristine Lego thing back again.
Yeah.
So in a way, I feel practice can be like that you can follow your plan, and then actually the plan is no longer what you want.
Yeah.
The plan is no longer interesting. The plan is no longer productive or even useful in any way. And that where you took yourself through engagement with this process is where you are. And for me, that's a sort of application of a different kind of presence that has put the planning mind in the back room.
Yeah. And I can see how that it really immerses you, I suppose, in the experience of what it is to play either Lego or play cello. And for those of you at home who think, well, I've got to somehow master Sibelius' Seventh Symphony, and have that structure. I suppose what we may be saying, see if you agree with this, Dale, is that plans are sort of useful. I mean, we need to come to a rehearsal of a symphony having learned it, so it's not enough to go off and explore freely in that instance. But the problem is too often we are bound by plans and goals, and it's like we live our lives as a tick list. I mean, I can see the tick list that I make for my own life. You know, it's like, right, okay, today I have to achieve, you know, I don't know, 10 things, and you spend your life going to achieve rather than to kind of be in the process. And I suppose that's dangerous, because you're never truly there if you're just trying to learn all the notes of a piece. You're not necessarily really playing the piece, if that makes sense. I often think one of the disadvantages of written music is that it's really like a to-do list for music. You have a pitch and you have a moment in a musical pulse where you need to play it, but it's so incomplete. I suppose they really are just labels and signposts, incomplete signposts to an experience. Because I mean, we were talking generally about how we live our life, but we could maybe take this idea of being present and kind of living the process of life in opposition to the kind of tick list mentality. And we could take that down to the smallest element of music playing. You know, I often say to my students, you know, a note, no matter how short, always has a duration, and that usually gets a result from them, because they're busy trying to nail, let's say it's the tenths at the end of the exposition of Haydn D. You know, they have totally lost sight of what those mean in the phrase. And it really is literally about nailing them. I mean, you might as well take a nail gun and kind of try to punch each one into the fingerboard, because they have this idea that that's what, I suppose, what matters is achieving those notes in the right time. And they're not thinking about how their bow is, moving through space, the quality of the movement, things like that.
At this point, Dale and I thought it might be useful if I gave a specific illustration of the task-driven tick list kind of playing that I was referring to hearing quite often with my students, and the more process-based, the playing that acknowledges and appreciates the experience and duration of everything that we do, no matter how quick the music. So I mentioned the tenths at the end of the exposition of Haydn D. So very often, if we're concerned with nailing them, as I said, we don't appreciate the space and the duration of everything, the movement of the left hand, the movement of the right hand. So it might sound something like... And actually that was fairly in tune, miraculously. But you know, very often it comes out as jagged. So I just wanted to point out all the places that you can be aware of the quality of the movement. I can't even say all of the places, really. That's some of the places. So the first one really is the moment where we often go, oh dear, and that's when we have to reach up for the 10th. So we have both the journey here with the bow out, and I can feel that all the way down the arm. I can feel the shoulder blade gliding along the back. And we also have this feeling of opening up the left hand, which again is something, if I'm really in tune, that I can feel from the back. So slow motion, that we enjoy this. And of course, each of these moments, again, I can enjoy not firing off a machine gun or whatever, but actually it's kind of like this figure of 8 almost with the arm. And can I enjoy every moment of that rather than just the tick list of hitting each note? Hopefully that explains a little bit more of what I'm talking about. I mean, there's also the shifts down, all of these moments, you know, have a time, there's a duration that we hold onto that, and then a shift. Anyway,
I mean, we could really, if you shine a microscope kind of into the music, you realize that something that looks like just a little speck has an entire life to it. And the more we can appreciate that, the easier it's going to be to get out of our head and into the experience of the music, and that's what's going to communicate to our listener. Okay, so now back to the pre-recorded talk. Thank you. So I suppose there's like many directions and sort of tangents we can go down when we're exploring this issue around presence and playing, but I suppose the more to go back to kind of mindfulness as a topic, the more that I have kind of learned about that, the more I've realized how being in the present moment, being sort of living, I suppose, in awareness of my senses, I've realized how beneficial that can be for my cello playing. You know, I suppose, in opposition to being up in my head trying to achieve a sort of tick list of goals, I guess. But then it occurred to me, why not actually use cello practice as a practice to experience presence, as a sort of discipline in a way, just like meditation. It seems like the sort of perfect opportunity to kind of spend some time in our practice room focusing on experiencing presence as we play and the processes of everything, the sort of the journey, the duration of, it could be something as simple as open strings, or quite honestly, even bringing the bow to the string is a process. I mean, how many times have we had, sort of the urge to play and just instantly play, or a conductor, all of us, I'm sure, in any level of orchestra have had conductors who've impatiently wanted to start, and we think, darn it, we have to just, dive in there. But, examining the process from being still into playing is, to me, extraordinarily illuminating. It, for me, it reveals an awful lot of the thoughts that happen, and the kind of how cello playing, I suppose, for me, has all kinds of associations. I suppose it's something I've done for a long time, like many of us, and alongside that are many emotions and as well as thoughts and kind of feelings.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? And for me too, and I think for everyone, and certainly people who have started the cello as a child and maybe been given the instrument by their parent, not even necessarily chosen it.
Yeah.
But let's not go there, because that's a big can of worms. But and it could be a different experience for somebody who's taken it up in later life as an adult, which could be some of our listeners here. Learning a new skill as an adult is very, very different from learning it as a child, because I think our learning habits, of course, will still be very strong. However we learn, whatever we learn, we bring a set of habits of how we approach learning. And those habits are mind habits, thinking habits. But for something physical like the cello, there are also certain physical habits that we need to look at. So even what you say about putting the bow to the string, coming from my Alexander training, like you, I think I've enjoyed exploring just the movement of doing that, what's involved, and not even going beyond putting it there, and not falling into the habit of quickly playing. I learned something about the space between the thought to do something and the action of doing it, and that comes from a place of greater stillness, a place of choice and balance.
Yeah, I find for myself the kind of exploring that process, it kind of, what you're talking about, the stillness, it helps me really kind of be present in the moment, and sometimes even before I play, I sort of, I try to sort of sit back and experience the whole thing. I think we used the term previously, witnessing. That for me, the greatest playing, in a way, there's a part of us that is simply witnessing what's happening rather than actively being involved. And it's incredibly freeing, I suppose.
And for me, I mean, I love the witness word, but it's sort of refers to watching something. But actually, for me, it's more about listening. So my witness is a listening mode, if you like, and supportive. A supportive quality to it, which is almost like encouraging in some way as well. So I feel kind of held and nurtured by that listening mode rather than overly directed or criticized.
Yeah.
So it's a comforting sort of mode, the witness, let's call it the witness. It's part of the mind, I believe, but a different part from the chattery mind, the doing tick list mind.
We've been talking a lot, I suppose, about this very open, free, explorative way of playing, and I suppose it might be sort of helpful to kind of get into the subject when you have something, I suppose we could actually say it's like a task to learn, isn't it? Sometimes, you have goals. All of us, we have to prepare music for, that our teachers have requested us to do, or an audience is expecting us to hear, or the conductor, wants us to hear, our friends. And I suppose I thought it might be interesting to, I suppose talk about what happens in our minds as we work towards these things. And I suppose I'm thinking, before I was referring to cello playing in a way as a sort of tick list, because no matter how detailed your musical understanding, we can know that every note has a shape, every note has direction. All of those can be turned into kind of a thought, almost like a set of instructions. And I've definitely, as a student, tried to think, well, everything needs to have a purpose. Therefore, on this note, I'm going to crescendo, and then I must do a smooth bow crossing, and then be careful that on the next string, because it's a higher string, we need to use a little less weight so that it doesn't jump out because it's already brighter. We have this incredible list of instructions we can follow, and that's it. Well, it's no matter how detailed it is, it's still just sort of thoughts. And so we've been talking about how to, I suppose, step away from thoughts that way, but it just also occurred to me that there's the other kind of thoughts that come in, which is the sort of judgment thoughts. So, when I don't know about you, but I feel like I inherited an idea, and I think it's quite prevalent. You see if you agree in classical music that one must always be critical and criticizing and judging in order to improve. That I certainly was told, don't just play through. And these aren't bad. This isn't bad advice necessarily. It depends how you take it, But I thought, I must always know, what I'm doing, and I must decide if that was good or that was bad. And I've actually come to feel that those are sort of unhelpful, those judgments, because even though they're about something that happened in the past, it's still a thought, and it's not about what's happening in the present moment. And these judgments, it's like I almost trained myself over 35 years or whatever cello playing to do this constantly. But every time my mind is, or rather every time I am focusing on this chatter in the mind, it's taking me away from the experience of what I'm doing. Do you have that similar kind of critical kind of programming, kind of societal programming?
Yeah, I think so. And I think those voices are from so many sources, and probably start with our parents and then our teachers, and then they permeate our whole being, and they become our voices, sort of, even though I might be able to identify that little message I just gave myself, oh yeah, I remember my teacher telling me that, and what good advice, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But and I'm going to pass that on to my students as well, and then they're going to struggle with these voices. So it's not that I wouldn't say they're, let's use the bad word, I wouldn't say they're bad. I just think that we need more a sense of guidance and support of a process, and less the kind of confronting. I almost can imagine those voices being people in front of me, looking at me, disembodied, just little voices, a kind of Alan Bennett of talking heads.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to have those more in the back of my awareness as being guiding, supporting, listening, evaluating, friendly, kind voices. That would mean that if I'm on a passage that I am preparing for something, what's useful is to be listening in such a way that is observing what happened with a shift. Was it sharp? Was it flat? Was it too grabbed at? Was it tense at the moment of changing a bow? All the things that are helpful observations of our process, of our work process, rather than the voices coming at us. That was sharp, that was out of tune, or that was clumsy, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean that reminds me of a sort of discovery I feel I've made, which is that I don't need to label these things as even sharp or flat. That see if you can relate to this. That I feel like I slam down with a judgment, like that was sharp, that was flat. Rather than the awareness that precedes the label that my mind puts in. And I guess that's what I'm talking about the judgment, or that voice getting in the way of me actually sort of listening. And very often it's not. This judgment isn't even that it's sharp or it's flat, it's that it's out of tune. And then it sort of, it shuts down my listening to that. And what I really have discovered is that I don't need to label it to know it. There's a knowing, that's effortless, and it's the knowing of awareness. And I think any sort of voice in the head label, judgment, if you will, absolutely takes you away from that knowing of what is currently happening. And for me, I've started to become almost delighted and fascinated by noticing how this happens time and again. And in my own playing in difficult passages, I feel that the voice starts getting more active. I stop being able to hear. Another thing I notice is I stop being able to see. Having wide vision is I suppose another sign that I'm aware.
So, we hope that gives you a flavor of the conversations that Dale and I had. We had hours of conversations, and we could have had hours more, but unfortunately the lockdown was imposed, and we couldn't talk anymore. And so, I suppose now Dale and I, we both thought we might like to leave you with some final thoughts, having reviewed our conversation. And I guess I just want to really emphasize why I feel this topic of presence is so important in playing music. And the reason is because when we're working on developing ourselves as musicians, the most important aspect to that is awareness. If you think about it, when you go to a teacher, yes, you're going for some technical knowledge, for the experience that somebody who's done this before and knows what works. But more than that, you're going to work with an individual who will help grow your awareness. More often than not, they're pointing out things that you were not aware of. So in order to improve the most when we're practicing, it's that awareness that's essential. If we're in the practice room, if we're being guided by our strong thinking mind, we're not going to be open to learning new things. And when I have an experience of practicing with real presence, the progress I make feels effortless because things come to me, things that I didn't know. I might have a new idea for phrasing. I might notice a technical issue that I wasn't aware of. And I thought I'd just leave you with an anecdote from my first experience with Ralph Kirschbaum. When I was trying to decide where to study, I went to New York and he happened to be there. We met up and I had my first lesson with him, and it was a life-changing experience. It's the reason I was originally drawn to Manchester. And what was so astounding about it was the questions that he asked me. So he didn't tell me stuff, he asked me questions, and it wasn't amazing because I didn't know what the answers were. What was amazing was that I didn't know that they were questions to be asked. He was asking me about my understanding of the music and the sound, and I had no idea that these were things to even consider. So that was a massive awareness broadening event. So this is why I think presence matters. It's the essential element to growing as a musician and an artist. And Dale, having just shared what I think, what would you like to leave our viewers with as the essential element as you see it?
It comes down to a question, in a way. How can we use our time at the cello to explore finding more awareness and presence? So, one can do it away from the cello. Many musicians are drawn, in fact, to processes that enhance that understanding of awareness. So I was drawn to Alexander technique, and through that, many other things. So, I also do yoga, and so any body kind of awareness work that also helps me feel more at ease as well and more flexible. But also meditation, which brings in the kind of mind and mindfulness kind of processes. So I can take that onto the cello and see playing the cello as a kind of meditation, and it's the psychophysical kind of process which we're already doing on the cello, which is enhanced by my Alexander training or other disciplines. So in a way, what I get excited by even more nowadays is just the fundamentals, partly because I'm teaching them such a lot. So I felt it took me a long time to trust myself to know how to teach the fundamentals. I needed to question, how do I do this anyway? I'd learned it, and so I had to sort of make myself re-aware of processes I'd been doing less consciously. And that's a tricky kind of thing in itself, to kind of suddenly make something very conscious that you've done without thinking, perhaps. So, it helped me focus my interests in the fundamentals more. And now I feel like I just go much deeper into them. I don't know if you feel the same.
I do, yeah. I mean, we were saying outside of this conversation that, when we were young cellists, we were always eager to be doing something harder and more advanced. And as we mature, we're finding ourselves finding more joy and more pleasure in the most fundamental activities, the open strings. And Dale, you prepared a video to share with viewers that we don't have time this evening, unfortunately, to play it for you. But if you're interested, we thought we'd find a way of sharing it with you. Dale, would you like to tell us a bit about that video we made?
Yeah, that was to give you an illustration of some of the ways that I work with the fundamentals in terms of taking time to explore how one can be aware in your body as you play. So for me, that is, as you probably might recall hearing me say in the conversation that we recorded, for me, presence is very much connected to being in the body. So it's like embodying the mind, or minding the body, whichever way round you want to think of it. They're both the same, essentially. So I talk a lot about the senses. So the little video gives you some insight into ways that you can slow down and pay attention to how you are producing a sound on the cello. So if you're curious, it'll be there, the link in the
We'll put a link
chat.
we'll put a link in the chat. And I have to say, having been present when Dale was creating the video, I found it a very, very calming experience to be in your presence, Dale, when you were doing it. So we highly recommend that to you. And I suppose now we're really hoping there's a way that we can field your questions and come in live to the YouTube live event via Zoom from our respective homes. If for some reason that's difficult, please feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll endeavor to answer them, typing as fast as we can. We're really sorry that we couldn't be down in London and that Dale and I couldn't be together in the same room when hosting this event and doing that live, but lockdown has conspired against us, and that's a small sacrifice compared to the sacrifice that many have to make during this difficult time. But it's been a real pleasure for us to explore these ideas. It's so much fun, Dale, discussing this, and I feel like when we get to do another retreat, we're going to have so much more material to have discussions with our participants. And so I guess from both of us, Dale, we wish you a very good evening and thank you very much for tuning in. So goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Great. I hope you're hearing me and Dale live now. Sorry if there's any technical glitches. I wanted to say that there was an issue with the chat, and if you can't see the live chat window, I've been informed that if you reload this YouTube live, then you'll get access to the live chat. We've had Justin and Selma starting us off with a few questions, and you can hear me now, Dale, I presume? Great.
Yeah.
There was a really interesting kind of question that Justin put up, and it brings up the topic of performance anxiety, I suppose. At least that's one of the things that we both thought of, and I suppose presence and performance anxiety, and actually the experience of slightly being out, observing oneself performing. I can think of quite a few performances that I've had like that, and it's usually accompanied by mind chatter. And maybe Dale, you want to talk a little bit about it, but we both feel that our response to that needs to be about getting back into the body and back into the senses. And I suppose the theme of what we've been talking about is that when you're really engaged with the sensory experience of living, then you're really truly present. And if you're too preoccupied with thoughts, if there's like a narration going on, then you are removed from what's actually happening, almost by definition, because of how the mind works. Dale, do you have something else you'd like to add about that?
Well, as I put in the chat in response to Justin, for me, the most important tool that I use is to think of listening. Listening and really coming into my body through listening and paying attention to my breathing. So one of the things that can create a sort of sense of discomfort or feeling you're not in the room when you're playing is our response to nerves. And we all, of course, suffer from that in different ways. And I think I could only emphasize more again is just practice the preparation in your practice room of really trying to connect with your bodies, practice listening to your breath as you play, practice sensing more your physicality, your arms, your shoulders, how they are for you, and listening. Work with listening. We talked briefly in the video about widening the field, and this is very important for me, how to listen wide, not and by that I mean almost actually physically imagining your ears bigger than they are and listening beyond the walls of the room. It's very easy to narrow our focus as you play.
One thing I made a reference to actually at the end of our conversation was also the vision, wasn't it? I mean, you're talking about listening wide, and I also see a connection with, I experience a connection with also my vision. And I don't know if if you think about how wide our peripheral vision is, and where we can start to see our hands, we have this incredible field of vision. And in fact, it was particularly on our very first cello retreat, Dale, where I was practicing in this barn, and I started to be aware of the fact that when my thoughts get involved, my vision would narrow. And so I tried to just keep playing with that wide vision, and for me somehow that's really connected with the wide listening as well. I remember you were using the beautiful landscape. This retreat was in Wales, and there's an amazing connection between those two as well. We have an interesting question, unless you want to come back on that, Dale. I don't know how much of a delay there is. But
there are many questions. Let's go to some.
They're coming in. Okay, so Selma wanted to ask about ways that we could cultivate attention in younger people. And Dale, you work with quite a few younger cellists. Would you like to kick off with that?
Yes, I've been actually taking the plunge more and more with particularly my teenage students who I feel are reaching a really wonderful age where their minds are very curious, and I'm working more and more with asking them to notice, to be aware of their bodies more, so physical triggers such as focusing on how they're sitting. Do they feel the chair under their sit bones? How are their feet? I draw attention to their shoulders a lot, the shoulder blades, and feeling the support of those in their back. But even deeper than that, I've asked several times where they feel they listen from, or where they even source their sound. And it's so fascinating what kind of response comes. And I've been really touched by the response and how deeply inside themselves they go and connect more with their core being, their listening, breathing self, and less experimenting more with that at the moment. But I feel that it's making some really positive changes with some of my younger ones. So that's one thought I have. What about you, Nick?
Sorry, I was just reading ahead on some of the other questions. Yeah, I suppose one of the interesting things that Dale and I discovered when we were discussing about this is our slightly different approaches that we take to this. And what I'm been particularly interested in is learning to be observant of how my mind works, the mind chatter. And in fact, this might connect to what Felix Rosenboom has talked about, where he says, I often feel that the judging voice is so strong in his head he can't hear or even see properly. So what I've often done, actually, I did a workshop with Chets, is I'll actually try to incorporate kind of traditional mindfulness practices with cello practice, and even begin a practice session with a breath meditation. And then what I find really interesting is that process of going from stillness into playing, and that gives me an opportunity to observe the chatter of the mind in a kind of objective way, I suppose. And I was just going to say to Felix that you're absolutely right. You say that you feel that forcefully trying to quieten the voice doesn't work, and you're absolutely right. If you try to battle that voice, my experience is that it only gets stronger, and you have to accept it, I suppose, and know that you have no power to stop it, and direct your attention to other things. And can I advocate for you, Felix, actually, and this, I advocate this to my students, sometimes actually playing things almost on purpose badly. And I'm thinking of, let's say some of the difficult passages in the coda of the first movement of the Dvorak Concerto. When I was a student and battling those and trying to work to build that up, I was so concerned with getting things right that I became more and more sort of tense. And I don't think we put this in the talk, but it's almost like walking on a tightrope somehow. And in the practice room, sometimes I could get from the beginning to the end without falling off. But what I realized was that I wasn't feeling the sensory experience listening to the harmony as I played it. And so what I started doing, especially when no one was able to hear, is just basically seeing if I could play through it and try to find the big feeling. But what the challenge there is whether or not you can observe things going wrong, like being out of tune, being uncoordinated, but sort of carry on, and not stop because you're judging. And I would also advocate to everybody here that I feel that there's a real issue with people aborting when they practice. Say they're playing something and you set out to play a certain amount of music. And I have this all the time in lessons. I'll ask someone to play a few bars and they stop the moment something goes wrong. And I think that's a real problem because we're practicing in slamming down with that judgment and stopping straight away. So see if you can play a passage and allow it not to be right, I guess. That's where I would start. Look for something bigger than the little, in a way, the little details, whether or not something's perfectly coordinated, or whether or not it's in tune, or whether or not the sound's what you want, and see how much more you can be aware of while you do that. Can you keep your wide peripheral vision as you play through that challenging passage? I hope that sort of helps. How are you doing, Dale? You've got...
Yes, okay. Just having some issues about sharing this link for people.
Okay.
I'm copying and pasting it and it's not showing up for some reason. So the suggestion is we email it, unless you can try, Nick.
I'll have a go, but I need to leave the live chat to do that.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not so great.
Maybe
coming back.
Yeah, you go on. You do that. I'll leave the live chat and I'll post it. How about that?
Okay.
1 sec.
I was just wanting to follow up on what you were saying to Felix, and I feel I just wonder how much you in your practice time, if you give yourself time to sometimes just stop and focus in on yourself, and because battling the voices is just more voices trying to tell one voice to stop talking. You end up in a battle. So just take time to stop and notice again. Just come into your body. Notice your breathing. Find a calm, sort of quieter place. That stop could just be 1 minute. It doesn't have to be ages. It's not even a question of putting the cello down. Just sit with the instrument and see how that feels. Are you back, Nick?
I'm back. I think I've posted it. Selma says it's posted. I'm assuming it's...
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe it's showing to the organization. I just did it in 1803 and posted a link. in the description. Yeah, maybe we could.
Oh, okay. That's another option. Okay.
Deary me. Well, I'm gonna maybe put attention to Jane Bevan's question, which she wanted to ask: when I'm leading the Halle and I have a big solo coming up, what do I do to get myself in the right mindset or present sort of state immediately beforehand? And this was a really big issue for me. In fact, I remember just how kind of thrown off balance I was. I mean, still am sometimes, but especially at the beginning. When I just joined the job, it felt like there was a million cello solos, I think, because they programmed things that would be good for trying principal cellos out. And so I got this whole season filled with cello solos. But I think on day 2, we were rehearsing the Enigma variations, which I'd never played. And the first little solo that you get in that 6/8 variation, I remember I guess sort of almost panicking. I managed somehow to play in 5/8, which delighted the front desk of the violas. Anyway, but the answer really is to stay connected to the music all the time, not to kind of come out and go, oh, here comes this big solo. So I'll find, let's say if it's something like Brahms' Second Piano Concerto, where you get, I mean, those in a way are the easiest because you have a whole movement. But in the scherzo, in the second movement of that, I really have to stay connected to the music that's happening in the moment and not think ahead. That's absolutely key. Although, I can actually feel a raising of the heart rate because I'm already hearing that music. And just the other day, the Halle started rehearsing a little bit, and we were doing the first Brahms serenade, and he almost exactly uses the same music then for the scherzo and the second piano concerto. And again, I felt this little tingle of excitement at the sound of essentially the movement before this big cello solo. But really the only way to deal with it is to stay connected to the music. And I guess that's because music, it's such a wonderful thing to potentially draw us into presence, because it's so sensual. It's so much about what we're feeling physically and sound. And we also, of course, have the vision. So that's really my approach to dealing with that. And Angela then asks how the feelings of presence differ between practicing and performing. I'd be really interested to know how this is for you as well, Dale. But I think ideally, what I've been trying to do, especially over the last maybe 5-6 years, is when I'm practicing, to make sure that practicing and that playing I'm doing is for the room and for the time that I'm in. About 4 years ago, especially, I remember beginning practicing about 6 months before I was going to do the Elgar. I began my work for that. And I was completely struck by the fact that my thoughts were turning to the performance 6 months in the future. And I had thoughts about, sometimes I'd be thinking, oh, this is going to go very well. Or I'd have thoughts about, oh, I wonder if the audience will like it. I wonder if my colleagues will like it. I started thinking, what will the principal flute think of how I'm playing? And I thought, wow, this is madness. When I'm playing the cello, I need to cultivate the playing is for the space I'm in now. And there is an interesting balance there in terms of preparing for performances. Sometimes it is helpful to visualize being in performance, but I feel that this method of working and making sure that I'm honoring the space and the time that I'm in, I feel that that's starting to pay dividends. I just did a concert for a series that Dale runs. That was their first post-lockdown 1 concert. And I felt like I was able to really enjoy being present. Of course, there's still the adrenaline, and then in a way that heightens the awareness. So in some ways that's beneficial because you become more aware of many sensations. So, but roughly I'm looking for it to be a similar experience. Dale, do you have anything to add for Angela's question?
Yeah, well, actually, what strikes me most about what you're saying, all of which I agree with, but you talked about enjoying, and I feel like it's so easy to lose connection with the joy of playing in performance because of all the obvious issues about performances, and one of the unexpected things as well can be, even if we've had a rehearsal in a venue, and we've had time to adjust to an acoustic, is just suddenly that acoustic changes when an audience fills the hall, and there's a little moment of like, oops, that just isn't what I had before, and it can throw us. And so again, I totally agree with Nick that committing to presence in our practice room, it strengthens the ability to be present. I mean, and in any situation, even between practice, just walking away from the practice room, letting that be also a moment of presence. It takes practice. It's not for nothing that it's been for centuries, millennia, a spiritual discipline.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions that we should address?
Rosie's just asked a question which I think is kind of related. How do you prepare in a few minutes before a performance? And I think for me that's a really interesting topic. And everybody has a different way of doing it. I'll ask you, Dale, what yours is in a moment. But I remember from the performances I've done, I've been fortunate between the lockdowns to have, I think, 4 or 5 little sort of chamber performances, and I've been obviously thinking about these ideas. And actually, for me, what's really important to do those few minutes before I play is to be still and be quiet. And I have done also a few years ago when I had some big solos with the orchestra, some concertos. I do spend a lot of time doing it, kind of lying on the ground, semi-supine, Alexander technique, breathing. But in those last few moments before I go on, when the mind's tempted to go, ooh, will I remember, what the notes are here in this bit? It's really important for me to just let go. And basically, I think it feels like dropping things. And this often happens, especially that moment I walk on stage. I've often found that actually a very liberating moment. And one thing that I appreciate when it's a concerto rather than an orchestral solo, because you have this ability to sort of take a breath and just think, well, here we go, and open yourself into the flow of the experience. But it's really, for me, it's that experience of kind of just letting go and in a way, admitting you have no control over what's going to happen. Your mind certainly doesn't. And actually, that's really exhilarating. And it always goes better when I'm able to really to let go and just go out and have an experience. What about you, Dale? What do you do? Some people play. I remember hearing from my teacher Kirschbaum that he would be like doing Brahms double with Zuckerman. Zuckerman would come in 5 minutes before, having just played tennis, literally from the tennis court, whereas Ralph had a different process. What's your process, Dale?
Well, I wouldn't do that because I think that would get my heart rate up, and I don't need to encourage that. So one of my favorite things is just doing long, slow bows and open strings. And that is, for me, very calming. But at the same time, I still want to connect to a sense of excitement, which I almost want to transform into enjoyment on the moment of starting the concert, whatever it might be. I mean, it does rather depend what it is. And, chamber music is often, I feel more at ease because I'm with friends. But yeah, I also, like Nick mentioned, some physical kind of practices. Sometimes I like just rolling up my spine. I roll my head down and sort of let the spine just hang and relax, and then I roll up again. But that's from standing. It's a bit hard to describe without showing you, but it's very relaxing for the whole spine and the arms because they can just hang. And then just sitting at the instrument and connecting to my breathing, connecting to how I feel gravity, experience that, and just doing slow bows. It's very, very calming.
Well, great. I think that's. I feel like that's the end of what I can see. I don't know if I'm having a sort of any technical problems as well. I thank you all for bearing with us. I'm absolutely thrilled in a way that we were able to answer some questions live and have some sort of discussion. It'd be amazing if we could be in a room and working together rather than all in our separate places. But that's what we need to do for the time being. So I guess I don't see any other questions. So shall we wish everybody a fantastic evening, Dale? What do you think? Are you typing?
I'm just typing a thank you, actually.
Okay.
There we go, but there it is.
Well,
yes.
Until we get to see many of you in person, then goodbye. And Dale and I will be seeing each other live next week when the Halle finally gets back to trying to create some concerts, although just they're online. So shout out there if anyone wants to subscribe to those when they're launched. Our first program will include Metamorphosen, which is going to be a real treat for all of us to dive into. And we wish you all health and happiness, and thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to the London Cello Society and Selma for inviting us to do this. It's something we care a lot about, and I feel like the more we as a community can discuss these issues, the happier and the healthier the performers and musicians are going to be in the future. So, and that would just be wonderful. So, I guess we'll sign off then, and thank you very much for joining us.